Episode 18, Chapter 17, Home by Sunrise. Chapter 17, Home by Sunrise. The light of a lone candle flickered in the mirror as Princess Peach combed the last tangles from her hair. She caught her hand shaking, as it sometimes did after long kidnappings, and took a deep breath to steady her nerves. She was nobody's prisoner, and she'd be home again soon. For the past 6 days, the Resistance had been letting Peach stay as a guest in their underground base. Her room was damp, and not much bigger than a cell, yet it felt like pure luxury after being trapped for so long in that lurid pink tower. The town above was lively, and its people had been nothing but gracious to her, but the princess was eager for nightfall, when she and her friends would be setting off for home.
"They'll miss Mario most of all," she mused, knowing whom to thank for the town's high spirits. Wherever he went, the hero had a way of leaving the world a brighter place than he found it. Peach would have liked to sit with him and hear about the adventure, the way she used to, but they had both stayed just a bit too busy. "He's still avoiding me, not that I blame him."
To be perfectly honest, she was still avoiding him, too. Sighing, Peach straightened her crown and gave herself a last, quick inspection in the mirror. Satisfied, she tucked the comb into a nearby satchel and slung it over her shoulder. That was it for packing. She hadn't been in Rogueport for long, and thus had few belongings, just some trinkets she had bought at the boardwalk market. Leaving the room quietly, without looking back, the princess set off down the winding hall. She made her way through the base, catching glimpses of her friends as she passed by. Yoshi was in the library, sharing a last drink of Chuck Cola with Professor Frankly. A few rooms down, Toad and Toadette were bouncing on suitcases, trying to make them shut around a mountain of souvenirs. In the living area, Kami Koopa was slumped on a sofa, wide awake but lost to the world. Peach paused, wondering if she should say something to comfort the old witch. Ever since she had learned of Bowser's fate, Kami had been unshakably depressed.
"What am I supposed to tell the kingdom?"
she had asked 2 days ago, briefly breaking a long silence, before lapsing into another.
"What am I going to tell Junior? He's not ready to lead by himself yet."
The Koopa King had sacrificed himself to bring the Empress down, which had been a shock to most, but not to Peach. She had seen his nobler side before, and only wished he had chosen to show it more often. She reached out to put a hand on Kami's shoulder, but thought better of it, letting it rest against the sofa back instead.
"It's nearly time to go, if you're still willing to help us."
The party was traveling back to Peach's castle, where this mess had begun, but when they arrived, they'd need a mage to open a path between timelines.
"Don't get your frills in a frenzy,"
the witch answered, turning just enough to make eye contact.
"I'll see to it that you get home safely. It's no less than Lord Bowser would have demanded."
The discussion ended there, so Peach headed out through the front door and into the sewers.
"I can't say I'll be sad to leave this neighborhood behind."
A pair of squeaks eyed her shiftily from across the water, but luckily neither dared to approach her. As quickly as she could, the princess made her way up the nearest maintenance staircase, out the iron door and into the grey pseudo-twilight. The stars had been reappearing, a few more each night, for the past week, but the sun and moon had yet to show themselves. Peach wasn't sure they ever would, perhaps some astral wounds were simply too deep. Either way, the bustling seaport, with its hidden cache of shine sprites, was as busy as ever. This town had been a haven for those who shunned the Empress, after all, so very few of its citizens had gone to the tragic Star Festival. As for the realm at large, it seemed to be rebuilding, as the Mushroom Kingdom always did. The Empress fall had left a certain power vacuum, but the people were trying to fill it with as much care and tact as possible. A wealthy local named Flavio had bombastically announced his candidacy for president, although Peach hadn't heard anyone else mention an election. Whatever ended up happening, she trusted that this world would be in good hands. Just across the street, Luigi was helping Raz and Rainy load supplies into the back of a shiny new pickup truck. According to Goombella, this one was a gift, and totally not stolen, which raised some questions that Peach didn't want to ask.
I think that's the last of it,
Luigi said, hoisting some luggage into the bed as the princess approached. When it was done, he turned to see her with a friendly wave.
Oh, Princess Peach, you're early. Nobody else is here yet. That's perfectly fine,
she replied, finding a spot on the sidewalk where she could feel the ocean breeze.
I've been stuck inside for so long, some fresh air is just what I need.
For a short while, she let her eyes wander the horizon. Her thoughts drifted to her subjects, and the reunion she hoped they'd have.
Luigi, do you think anyone will be waiting for us at the castle tomorrow?
A few days ago, Peach had asked Goombella to help her send a message. It had been a simple signal hack, patched in during the news, addressed to any of Peach's subjects that may have survived that first night.
They'll totally be there,
the Goomba herself said, waddling out from behind the truck.
Nobody refuses an invitation from a princess, especially when she promises them a way to get back home. I still think we should have left earlier,
Raz frowned, sitting exhaustedly atop the supplies. In this world, driving by night wasn't much different than driving by day, but the big issue was time. The castle meetup was scheduled for tomorrow morning, so the heroes were cutting it awfully close.
I guess it fits, though, for the Resistance's last mission to be as clumsy as the rest of them.
Rainy perked up from where she had been resting in the passenger seat.
There's still plenty left for us to do, dear. We need to pitch in with the rebuilding.
With the capital destroyed, its escapees had been left homeless, and the warp pipe network had been completely shut down. Rainy turned to Luigi with a bright grin, causing him to blush.
If only we had more hard workers like you and your brother to help us.
Peach turned back, confusion striking her at the mention of Mario. She had expected to find him here, helping with the supplies, but where was he? Come to think of it, she hadn't seen him all afternoon, and it wasn't like him to wander off without telling anyone. Surely there must be an explanation.
Luigi, if you don't mind me asking, where is Mario, anyway?
Luigi looked a bit sheepish, glancing aside as he answered.
Well, he and Vivian are.
He paused, rubbing the back of his neck before trying again.
Gee, this is hard to say. It was pretty weird hearing it myself, but...
Peach took a step closer, silently urging him on.
I guess you could say that they're currently... They,
Goombella cut in, grinning with mischief and pride,
are on a date.
Sure enough, far across town, Vivian and Mario were sitting at a table in the Toad Sisters restaurant. They had both been wanting to eat here, so it had seemed like a perfect way to spend their last evening in this world. This parallel timeline thing was still bizarre to Vivian, but right now, the implications weren't worth thinking about. She didn't know how many versions of herself were out there, how they had been born, or what their lives were like. But this Vivian knew she was the luckiest of them all. She had been given a chance with Mario, and it was real.
That was delicious,
the hero said, letting a passing waiter retrieve his empty spaghetti platter. The restaurant was busy, as it had been that day in the past, but the lighting was soft and the patrons were hushed, creating an almost dreamlike ambience.
Tasty and zesty act so differently, you would think their tastes would clash, but they fit together so well.
Vivian nodded, packing a bit of her zest special into a take-home box.
We should pitch the idea to the versions we know back home.
She smiled at the thought, then leaned in to accept a slice of the sumptuous treat that sat before her. Her senses lit up when she took the first bite.
Oh wow! Have you ever tasted anything this fluffy and sweet before?
By now, the meal itself had ended, and it was time for dessert. A couple's cake, a special menu item reserved for smitten young lovers. It had been brought out from the kitchens with a ceremony, complete with confetti and a little song. Supposedly, any couple who could eat the whole thing would get their picture put up on the wall. With Mario's determination and endless appetite, Vivian was sure they'd succeed.
Do you think she was telling the truth?
The siren asked, changing the subject to something a bit less nice.
My other self, that is, about me being a shadow queen.
The issue had been haunting her all week, but her counterpart had refused to talk about it.
I didn't take her seriously, but then I made that shadow hand.
She hadn't used the skill since, but it felt like the hand was still inside her, with a cold grip on her soul.
What if it's true, and I'm turning into...
Mario held a forkful of cake, but he set it aside to take Vivian's hand.
I can't say why you were born, he admitted, but I do know that it doesn't matter. You have a good heart, and that makes you completely different from the old queen, no matter what powers you share.
There he was again, the man whose kindness surprised her every day. His sincerity quelled the fear, so she let it go and reached for a second slice of dessert.
I'm just me, and I'm finally happy with that,
she decided as they lapsed into a warm, cake-filled silence. They tried feeding a few bites to each other, giggling like teenagers, but stopped when they got glares from the people beside them. Eventually, Vivian glimpsed the sky through a nearby window, and saw that twilight had left them behind.
It feels too early, but we need to get going. The others must be waiting for us by now.
As Mario called for the check, the siren saw a tiny bit of cake left on the dish. A single cherry and a smear of frosting. She quickly swiped it into her mouth, leaving an empty plate behind. When the staff noticed, they began to applaud, and a photographer Toad scurried over to snap a photo. The two beamed for the camera, and its flash filled Vivian with a sweet nostalgia. No matter what craziness life dealt them, this moment would always be safe, a world away but theirs forever. They left the restaurant, winding through the stalls of the evening market, which had stayed open late to account for the nighttime crowds. Since the sky's rebirth, stargazing had become a popular hobby. People filled the parks and plazas each night, exploring the heavens together. These new stars had formed new patterns, which meant fresh constellations just waiting to be seen, the sky canvas ready to be filled. Before long, they found themselves crossing through the harbor district, where sailors milled about, sharing drinks and tales by lantern light. Mighty trade ships loomed overhead, groaning softly in the sway of the tide. The docks were more built up here, but Vivian could still see the old stone jetty where, back home, her first adventure had reached its end.
So much has changed since then, and yet...
Mario drew up short, and the siren turned to see what had startled him. A few yards away, watching them curiously from beneath a lamppost, was the regal figure of Princess Peach. After a moment, she stepped forward to greet them, but diverted her eyes to the water.
I'm sorry, she began, I realize I'm probably the last person you want to see on your date.
Tension blew in like an ocean fog, but Vivian tried her best to navigate it.
No, it's fine. Are you out taking a walk, too?
She couldn't help but feel judged by the blonde, even though she knew Peach wasn't the jealous type.
Or were you trying to find us? I hope we haven't kept you all waiting for long.
Peach was about to answer, but that's when Mario found his voice.
You shouldn't have come this far by yourself,
he told her, offering an arm. He was polite, but unusually stiff, and for the first time, Vivian saw the nature of the rift between them.
Come on, princess. We'll escort you back to the base, okay?
The princess pulled back, a hint of vexation slipping through her mask.
Mario, I'm not a child. I don't need a guardian every time I walk down the street.
She clutched her dress, as if she were afraid she might slap him otherwise.
And for the last time, please call me Peach. We're still friends, just like we were before we tried dating.
It was hard to tell if the last bit was a belief or an order.
It's so much easier for you, isn't it?
Mario asked, standing his ground just beyond the lamp's halo.
Maybe that's why you never explained why we broke up.
His voice was calm, but the hurt was visible in his eyes. Vivian glided closer to him, a supportive presence, but kept quiet. She thought it wiser to let the exes hash this out, it would be healthier for all three of them in the end.
You think it's easy, to put my kingdom before love?
Peach bristled, struck by the indignation. But bitterness didn't suit her, so she set it aside with a shake of her head.
The truth is, it felt sweet to pretend we could be together, but it was so unfair to you.
Her next words were hushed, and tinged with resignation.
You have every right to be angry with me.
Mario looked down, chasing his thoughts through the cobblestones.
I was never angry with you, just confused,
he finally said, putting the past to rest. He took a step forward, offering his own earnest apology.
I'm sorry too, for asking you to give something you couldn't. I should have respected your position from the start.
Peach met him halfway, letting the bridge be fixed.
You shouldn't be sorry, Mario, you should be happy. Vivian here is quite a catch.
The siren nearly choked on her breath, stunned, as the princess turned to address them both.
Someday soon, I hope you'll visit for tea, and tell me all about how you found each other.
With those simple words, the stifling mist began to fade. Mario took a small bow, grateful to accept the invitation.
It would be my pleasure, princess.
Vivian gave him a playful nudge, and he chuckled when he realized his mistake.
I mean, it would be our pleasure, Peach.
The princess giggled at the scene, and gave the pair a genuine smile.
The two of you really do make a cute couple, you know.
Mario blushed at the compliment, while Peach stepped in to whisper conspiratorially in Vivian's ear.
When we get home, I'll teach you my special cake recipe. That's how you'll really make him yours.
The hero leaned in to join them, an eyebrow raised in curiosity.
Ah, what are you two whispering about?
But then, all at once, he seemed to realize how long they had been standing there.
Mamma mia, we need to move it. Luigi must be worried sick by now.
He took off up the nearby stairs, leaping them 5 at a time, leaving the princess and siren to follow after. Vivian took one last, long look at Rogueport Harbor.
This time, my adventure is just starting,
she thought, then turned to trail after the two friends, towards the future, back to everyone. In his diary, Luigi kept track of the time he spent waiting for his friends. It was a big fold-out spreadsheet, and these days it was due for a pretty big update. After Peach had left to find the lovebirds, Raz and Rainy had returned to the base to collect everyone else. Goombella was buying last-second snacks, which left Luigi to guard the truck by himself. He passed the time by people watching, studying the Rogueport nightlife as strangers passed to and fro. Up the street, a bushy-mustached merchant was selling binoculars to young stargazers. Excited chatter filled the air, drifting in from the crowded beachfront.
Oh my gosh, is that Luigi?
A voice squealed, echoing from somewhere unseen. Instantly alert, the hero glanced around in search of the source. A few seconds later, a wisp of girlish laughter lured his gaze to a nearby alley. Straining his eyes, he could just make out a pair of figures watching him shyly from the shadows.
He's such a hunk, isn't he, sis? Don't tell anyone, but I'm a total Luigi fangirl.
His interest piqued, Luigi hopped out of the truck bed and sauntered across the street.
He's headed this way. It's your big chance, sis.
A second voice gushed, matching the first in excitement.
You should totally ask for his autograph, and maybe give him a smooch.
This was also very new, perhaps Luigi's wishes were finally coming true?
Your hunka hero is here, ladies,
he said, grinning as he turned the corner to find an empty passage, stark and smelly with no signs of life. A lone street light buzzed, flickering weakly across graffiti-smeared walls. Somewhere, a cat yowled behind a chain-link fence in a pile of trash.
Huh, I guess they got scared and ran off.
Luigi figured, scratching his head as he turned back to
Gyahhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhhh. Things that tore the world to shreds. Luigi shrieked and tripped back, landing in the trash as he tried to plead for mercy. The thing surged in, ravenous. But its scream turned to laughter, and Luigi blinked up to see Pika and Lala, the twin boos who had befriended Lady Bow. That was perfect.
Lala snickered, giving the hero a wink.
Sorry Luigi, but we just had to say thanks for saving our bestie.
As if on cue, Bow herself materialized near Luigi's shoulder, her eyes glinting with mirth.
For what it's worth, I tried to talk them out of it,
she assured the man, brushing a bit of grime off his sleeve as he tried to stand.
But they said I was being a killjoy, and, well, I simply couldn't have that.
Luigi was shaky on his feet, and soon had to sit back down.
Are you all right? It was just a prank, dear.
He knew from experience that he was about to cry, but somehow, that isn't what happened. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Luigi began to laugh. It was tired and weak, but it mixed with the sisters' giggling until they stopped to stare at him, confused.
I think we broke him,
Pika whispered, but Bow didn't answer. She just smiled, strangely proud, as her friend began to set fear aside. Out in the street, Luigi heard his friends' voices, and soon he heard Mario shouting his name. He pushed himself up and hurried out to meet them, letting the ghosts follow as the party gathered for its last trip home. Hours later, after a bumpy ride and several pit stops, the truck finally turned off-road into that weedy field by the river. Goombella sat up, hoping she'd be the first to spot the ruined castle in the distance. There were 14 of them packed into this pickup, somehow, which made the Goomba wish she had hijacked a bus. Raz was up front with Professor Frankly. The old shroom had asked to see the castle for himself. Goombella and Rainy were in the bed, like last time, with everyone from the other world. It was extra cramped now, because they had insisted on giving the princess extra room. Vivian had tagged along too, but she mostly kept to herself, lurking in the shadows beneath their feet. Soon, the smoke-stained spires of Peach's castle rose into view beyond the trees. It looked eerie in the pre-dawn gray, its burned-out windows gaping like the empty eyes of corpses. Peach let out a sob when she saw it, but Yoshi, who sat beside her, gave her a gentle pat on the arm.
It can be rebuilt,
he promised, pointing to the sturdy walls.
It's mainly stone, so the structure itself is still intact.
When they pulled into the courtyard, a small group was there to greet them. Goombella and the princess shared a glance. Their message had reached a few of her subjects, at least. One of them was an elderly toad, who ran to Peach as fast as he could until she knelt to embrace him.
Oh, princess, I was so worried.
He sobbed, fussing over her like a parent.
To think you could be lost in such a foul, twisted place.
Peach stood up, letting him go.
Hush, Toadsworth,
she chided, turning back to smile at the party.
This world is quite nice, once you get used to it. Some of its people even helped save me.
As the two groups merged, she studied each of the new faces, unsung heroes who had seen that awful night and lived.
But what about all of you? How did you escape?
One by one, each survivor shared their story. Toadsworth and a beanish crone named Lady Lima had hidden together in a cupboard. A stout bumpty, mayor of a place called Shiver City, had played dead very convincingly. A singer named Chanterelle had eluded the soldiers with a bit of feminine charm. A lanky guy in purple refused to explain himself. He simply WAAAH. NTE'd to get out of here. Without a word, Cammy flew off to prepare the transport ritual. While she scribbled runes across the castle walls, Professor Frankly approached the heroes thoughtfully.
"You're not concerned with what you'll find over there?"
he asked, squinting over his spectacles.
"Your Mushroom Kingdom has gone quite a while without its leader."
Yoshi spoke up on their behalf.
"It's happened before, once or twice,"
the dinosaur said sheepishly, earning a subtle groan from Luigi.
"I'm more worried about the situation here,"
he confessed, gazing out towards lands past the horizon.
"After everything that's happened, will the Empire be able to sustain itself?"
Peach nodded, giving her own opinions.
"I saw on the news that the Bean and Sarasa provinces might secede," she put in, adding that other annexed kingdoms would be sure to follow. "With no army to stop them, I suspect it'll be easy."
She smoothed the sides of her dress, breathing a last sigh.
"With any luck, things will settle out peacefully."
Quickly bored with politics, Goombella waddled over to join the two Vivians, who were attempting a last bit of reconciliation. They stood in the shade of a wilting hedge, sharing their plans for the future.
"Where do you think you'll go?"
the first siren asked, attempting a handshake.
"You're free now, so you can see the whole world if you want."
Her duplicate pulled back, wincing at her own painful memories.
"I'm not free yet, I've still got so many sins to atone for."
Redemption was a long road, and she had been Kamek's lackey for years. Who knows how many lives they had messed up?
"I should start with Twilight Town. Someone needs to apologize for everything that happened there."
At that, Mario wandered over to join the conversation.
"The Twilighters need more than an apology,"
he said with a sad shake of his head.
"I haven't stopped thinking about what Mayor Doer said to me. They deserve to have a protector, someone who knows what it's like to be outcast."
The shadow looked at him in surprise, but after a moment of thought, she nodded. Perhaps this world had a place for her after all?
"You know, I could help, if you wanted,"
Goombella offered,
"since I don't have much else going on."
In truth, she thought it might be fun to hang out with the siren for a while longer.
"We'll keep misfits safe, wherever we find em."
Faux Vivian listened curiously, and the Goomba felt a strange kind of excitement brewing.
"They'll call us, Viv and Bella, Twilight Defenders. Has a nice ring to it, don't cha think?" "I think I'd like that very much," the shadow sang, risking a smile, but then her face fell as she thought of something else. "Eventually, I suppose I'll have to meet my sister again. I've wanted to kill her for so long."
The mood suddenly chilled, until she shook her head and whispered,
"But that won't help, will it?"
The first Vivian answered, speaking from a place of experience.
"She's bitter and mean, but there's good in her. When the time comes, I know you'll do the right thing."
She held out an arm, and this time her twin accepted the gesture. They held hands for a brief moment, finally understanding each other.
"Whatever happens, I wish you all the best."
A while later, Cammy returned from her flight, the ritual drawn and ready to be cast. Runes encircled the plaza, stretching up the walls and snaking around the towers like sproutle vines. From on high, the old witch directed friends to part ways, those from her world into the circle, and those from this one to the edge. Soon it was time, and a wind of wild magic began to blow. A cold violet mist spilled from the runes, cascading down the ramparts like an ethereal waterfall. It began to pool at the departing heroes' feet, urging them to huddle closer as the ground beneath them glowed white. Suddenly, Toadette dashed from their midst, sprinting over to grab Goombella in a last, desperate hug.
"I don't wanna leave yet,"
she cried, holding on for dear life.
"I'll miss you so much."
Goombella closed her eyes, wishing so badly she were able to hug back.
"I'll miss you too, kid,"
she said, letting Toadette scamper away. Seeing the girl, so filled with dreams, reminded her of something important. As the mist swirled higher, she looked to Mario and yelled,
"Hey, if you see that other Goombella, tell her about me, okay? Even without school, I want her to know that I turned out fine."
Mario smiled and nodded, and then his face was lost behind the rising curtain of magic. As the Goomba took a cautious step back, rejoining the professor and her friends, the voice of Princess Peach called out in farewell.
"Thank you all, and may the stars shine down on you."
Slowly, a warmth filled the air, which Goombella put down to sentiment until she heard Rainy gasp beside her. She turned around, back toward the east, where for the first time in years, the sun was beginning to rise. Its soft light broke above the horizon, pushing back the ashen sky with calm waves of pink and orange. Rays of color brushed across the land, bathing the field and distant hillsides in an aura of rebirth. The five on the ground could only stare in silent wonder as their world came back to life. The married toads held each other, while the professor began to put forth theories. Nearby, the shadow siren seemed unsure, but finally moved forward to let the light wash over her. As for the Goomba girl, she felt the winds of her fate begin to change.
"We did it, Rolf,"
she thought, closing her eyes to soak in the dawn.
"It wasn't easy, but together we made a future worth living in."
When she turned back, the castle and its heroes were gone without a trace. The first thing Mario felt, when the dizziness passed, was the cool breeze of a midsummer's day. As the spell's light faded, he looked up to see the bright blue skies of home. They had finally made it, back to the Mushroom Kingdom they all knew and loved. Birdsong filled the air, and the very clouds seemed to smile upon the new arrivals. Peach's castle stood tall overhead, its white walls bathed in sunlight, back in the place where it belonged. Beyond its gardens, leafy trees and mighty mushroom groves marched away toward the distant blue peak of Shooting Star Summit. Here in the courtyard, nausea had claimed several victims. In the background, Toad was heaving his lunch into a fountain. Warp magic was never pleasant, especially when it spanned dimensions. Mario helped Luigi up, giving his brother a pat on the back.
"Let's not do that again,"
Luigi said with a pitiful shudder.
"Next time, can we pick an adventure where we get to stay in town?"
Vivian soon rejoined them, swaying woozily on the tip of her tail.
"Gee whiz, that was a bit too wild for me,"
she agreed, but she hummed happily as Mario leaned in to support her. Before either could speak, a brilliant commotion made everyone look to the castle gates, into the oncoming rush of a joyous stampede. The people of Toad Town were pouring from their homes, cheering wildly as they streamed into the streets. Toads of all colors, plus Goombas, Bubulbs, and everything in between. They came as one, all celebrating the return of their beloved princess. Here and there, voices even rang up from the rooftops. Yoshi, the nearest to the gate, pulled it open with his tongue to let the throng inside. But then, without warning, the crowd began to shriek in panic, scattering back into town the way it had come. Toads were tripping over themselves to flee as a bullet bill struck the plaza, forcing Mario to leap backwards. Suddenly, Behind him, Princess Peach let out a terrified scream.
"Let me go! Mario, help me!"
The hero spun around, futilely reaching out a hand as the princess was yanked up into the sky. All at once, the sound of engines pierced the clouds. Mario really shouldn't have been surprised. From out behind the castle, a massive fleet of airships soared into view, heavily armed and casting blackness over the land. Peach flew towards it, kicking and yelling, carried by a pair of sturdy paratroopers. Standing at the flagship's prow, against all reason, was King Bowser himself.
"Look who's back, chumps!"
he roared, throwing his arms wide to gloat.
"While you guys were resting over there, I took a head start."
In an instant, Cammy was back at his side, gushing about her king's power and timing. The paratroopers delivered Peach straight into Bowser's waiting claws, and he let loose a laugh of triumph.
"You can't be here, you brute!"
the princess shouted, still squirming defiantly.
"You fell into the void. Mario saw it happen." "Yeah, whatever,"
Bowser shrugged as the airships began to ascend.
"Everything went white, and then I woke up in a park in Mushroom City."
Perhaps he had been ejected there?
"Two toad kids were poking me with sticks, but I taught them a lesson they won't soon forget."
Peach gave him a look of horror, but the Koopa kept going, heedless.
"That's right, I told em very sternly that it's rude to mess with strangers."
He glanced over the side, grinning smugly at the heroes who were still scrambling in his shadow.
"So long, losers. I got my princess, so I'd say this is a happy ending."
With that, the fleet turned north and climbed beyond reach, catching the wind as the ship's sails and engines swept them away, back to the Koopa Kingdom from whence they had come.
"The more things change, the more they stay the same,"
Luigi muttered, listening to the princess' fading cries.
"We had better go after her, brother."
Mario was one step ahead, already astride Yoshi and eager to get moving. Vivian glided up beside them, faithfully prepared to fight by their side. A beat later, Lady Bow floated up to join, looking very much like a victim of peer pressure. They set off, together, across the hills and fields of their wondrous world.
"It's good to be back, Luigi,"
Mario asked, turning to his brother with a smile. In his mind, he was already miles ahead, planning the routes which would bring the most adventure. Through this forest, over that ravine. The possibilities were as boundless as the future. End of chapter.